the DEA dragged away the crops and seeds were scattered everywhere. So there's feral hemp growing all over the reservation now, courtesy of the DEA.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the James Loud Podcast. Today, my guest is Malcolm MacKinnon, previously from High Times Magazine, amazing photographer, good friend. We haven't talked that much in the last maybe 5 years, but he's a great guy, and I'm glad to have you on the show today.
Oh, thanks so much, James. A real pleasure. I mean, it's been a while. I mean, I toured your grow rooms in San Francisco. We spent a few days together, and
that was 10 years ago.
Oh yeah, man. And you brought in all those great artists at the Cannabis Cup too, man. So, you were part of High Times there. You were in deep there during the Cannabis Cups, during the golden age of Cannabis Cups, I should say.
Those were amazing times, man. Really good times. Yeah, it's changed a lot. The whole world's changed a lot since back then.
Well, especially for High Times. I mean, I've been talk about this just former colleagues, and I think one of the real problems is for High Times is that the outlaw edge is gone. It's cannabis is becoming more and more mainstream. So what is High Times now protesting against? It used to be a very, very definite opposition to government control in any way. That's what High Times was. High Times motto was do what the hell you want, as long as you don't hurt anybody, and the hell with anybody else. Fuck them. That was High Times. So, the whole cannabis thing has kind of changed High Times a bit. And I think they've made some real poor decisions in the last few years. And the publishing industry has certainly been a problem because do you see magazines anywhere anymore except the dentist's office possibly? So, right. It's everything's changed in the industry as far as media is concerned. There are a lot of pot magazines out there. And I can't really say a lot of good things about them. They seem to be covering their advertisers for the most part, and they're kind of boring. They're great for rolling on, but I can't really get real excited about cannabis media these days. Certainly, there are a lot of corporate entities now in the business, and you want to cover these people, fine. But
right. Well, you used to have some balls to be involved in cannabis. I mean, even on the media side, to do an event, you had to have some balls to go out there and try to do an event because they wouldn't always allow you to do it, even if you'd planned and paid for permits sometimes.
We got raided. I remember Cannabis Cup, I guess it was, I can't remember, maybe 2011, 2012 in Amsterdam. We had 150 cops come in and raid the Cannabis Cup.
Oh, yeah.
Seriously, it was unreal. It was, they thought that a drug park was going on, which is a drug park in Europe is, where people are doing meth and they're doing shooting up and stuff like that. But, listen, the one thing that people don't realize, a lot of people who are newcomers to cannabis, the Johnny come latelys, that cannabis was very, very dangerous to deal with. And a lot of people went to jail. A lot of people had their families broken up, had their property taken via these draconian RICO laws, forfeiture laws, I should say. Terrible stuff happened. So I think when people, these days don't understand that the industry stands on the shoulders of these people, the entrepreneurs, the growers, the dealers who kept this plant alive. And believe me, it was dangerous. During the Reagan-Bush administrations, it was downright dangerous. And Clinton was no better, by the way. And right. Obama wasn't even better. I mean, there was a lot of persecution for pot. The war on drugs has been a war on pot. Why? Because meth is dangerous and heroin is dangerous and cocaine is dangerous. I should say the people who are dealing with that stuff, they're dangerous people. But pot people are pretty peaceful. And so you got a grow room, the cops come in, they seize everything, seize your property, break up your family. It's a hell of a lot easier than dealing with meth dealers. So the war on drugs has been a war on cannabis, period.
Yeah, from the beginning.
From the beginning, that's what it's all about. When Richard Nixon declared the war on drugs, he was holding up a pound of pot, okay? He wasn't holding up needles or anything like that.
Right.
So, it's...
It was also a war on hippies, I mean, it was a war on counterculture. It was more than just drugs,
Sure was. It sure was. People have pointed out to me that you realize that around 78, 79, disco got real popular. And, these, polyester shirts and, looking like a disco guy really became the popular thing. It was like, it seemed to be this insidious war on hippie culture. Because suddenly you have this manufactured music. It's not rock and roll. And you have John Travolta dancing around in tight pants. And suddenly, I mean, what the hell happened to the culture? Seriously. Because in the 60s and 70s, man, it was all about, hippiedom and, the great rock groups of those times. Things changed, man. It really did.
Yeah, I believe it. So let's go back into your history a little bit and start talking about your experiences with cannabis from the beginning. Where did it all start?
My experience from the beginning. I mean, I went to the University of Michigan in 1975, and Ann Arbor, Michigan, was the most liberal place for pot in the country, period. It was a $5 desk appearance ticket if you were walking down the street smoking a joint. If you had an ounce, it was only a $25 fine. And these laws predated the legalization by decades. So that's where I went to school, and I experienced some of the greatest pot ever. I mean, I had some Oaxaca. I remember one time it just blew my mind. I thought I was having an anxiety attack. This stuff must have been just off the hook. I mean, I thought I was going nuts. The only anxiety attack I've ever had. So that was, going to University of Michigan, and I went to New York to become an actor. I was a theater major. We got a master's in theater, and I went to New York to become an actor. I had some success, did a few different things. And then I moved into the fitness industry. I became a top aerobics instructor, taught in Japan. I was part of the Pro Reebok team. I led New York Sports Club during the aerobic boom, and I got sick of that. Ran into Peter Gorman, who was an editor of High Times at the time, and he recommended me to photograph some of his stories. I was, working on as a photographer for a long time. It was my hobby, and I got better and better at it. So this was a real break for me to go to High Times and start a career there. I did my first full feature in 1991, but I did have a feature, had work published in 1989. So that's where it started in 1991. And I became a photo editor, then features editor, then a senior editor, and I became an editor at Hemp Times. I would, really, and it was a wonderful place to really hone my photography, find out, how good a photographer I could be, but also learning about cannabis simultaneously, because this was a real education for me. There was the people who were involved with High Times and were involved in legalizing drugs were very, very driven people, intelligent people, very, very creative. So it was a great break for me out of the fitness industry into High Times magazine. I mean, High Times opened up the doors for me in so many ways. So many things I was able to do. So many celebrities I've interviewed. So many experiences I've had are all because of High Times. So I have a great affection for High Times. I spent 25 years there. 25 years, my God, that's a quarter century. That's over a third of my life when you get down to it. So. Yeah, I mean, it was a tremendous experience. And that's where it all started, 1991. And, seriously, High Times was my entrance into the world of cannabis, into meeting all these people like you, very righteous people who were really brilliant seed breeders, plenty of, big time dealers and celebrities and people in the cannabis industry who are really leaders or were doing their thing, on the sly. And Loud Seeds was one of them. When I visited you in San Francisco, things were still, you had to keep things undercover. It was still a very, very dicey arrangement. So when I visited you and, toured your grow rooms with you, we drove down to LA together. There was pot being delivered down there to a dispensary. It was different times. And that's only 10 years ago, man. So when people say that they're pioneers or that they've, forged a path on their own, I ain't buying it. I know what people went through. I know what the work had to be done by the activists, the entrepreneurs, the dealers, and the growers. The people kept this plant alive while it was being, vilified by the government.
Right. Generations before me. I mean, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants in the breeding world, the cultivation cannabis, people like you that, believed in the industry that, tried to make a difference.
Yeah. Well, I think we all did. I mean, I think we realized what we were involved in. I think that was the exciting thing about being with High Times. Truly, it was just the fact that we felt like we were on a mission of some sort. We weren't doing People magazine or, a food magazine. We were doing cannabis, and it was dangerous. And believe me, the government tried to shut down High Times a couple times. First with Green Merchant in the early 90s, when they actually subpoenaed UPS's records to find out who was buying hydroponic equipment. That was a war on growers. They were going after them. You see, if you ordered hydroponic equipment, you might have the DEA showing up your door and say, "Can we see what you're doing with that stuff?" That's how bad it was. And then, of course, in 2003, 2004, Operation Headhunter and Operation Pipe Dreams, when they went after the bong industry, they tried to go after our advertising. We had very, very heavy advertising high times at that point in the glass industry. We were getting tons of glass ads. Bongs were huge. And so they went after it, and they arrested 57 people for shipping bongs and paraphernalia over state lines. They busted 57 people, including Tommy Chong. Tommy Chong was the only one of that group that went to prison. He went to prison for 10 months for manufacturing a bong. That was not that long ago, folks. That was like 2005. So it's dangerous. It was dangerous. And in a lot of the country, it remains very dangerous.
Yeah, it's a strange thing. And the stigma is slowly changing. I mean, I see it with the older generations and also the younger generations like myself that are getting older. There's a lot of people in the United States that have tried cannabis on some level, whether it's an edible or a joint or whatever, whether it's high school. But I think the stigma is changing. I think especially in places like California, New York, we have this area in the center of the country where slowly, but even look at Oklahoma. I mean, Oklahoma's changing. Texas is changing. So
I know, but there are a lot of the deep South states, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, that are not friendly to marijuana at all. I mean, you're still taking your life in your hands. Nebraska ain't so cool either. That's always the weird thing. When you're in Colorado, you have a choice of Nebraska or Kansas. Those both border Colorado. And they are very, very tough states on marijuana. Totally. I've heard often of people crossing state lines in Colorado going into Kansas, and the cops are just waiting. You got stickers, you look like a hippie car, they're going to pull you over, find out if you got pot in the car. Yeah,
they don't care. Yeah, they're and it's a money thing too.
Oh God, yes. I mean, listen, the war on drugs is all about money. Right. It put a lot of people made money off the war on drugs. Prosecutors, states, all the revenue people had to pay, court costs, all that kind of stuff, and of course, we incarcerated millions. In the United States has the most people in prison in the world. We imprison people for everything. Now, granted, there are a lot of bad people, who should be in prison, and I don't know if there's an alternative. I mean, I've heard people talk about, are there alternatives to prison? And that's a really, really difficult question. I remember interviewing this woman named Maya Shenwar, an attorney in Chicago in high times. And she said, listen, prison evolves. I mean, people used to put people in chains. We don't do that anymore. So I don't know. In many ways, I think we're still a very primitive society as far as how we treat people who disobey the law, especially when it comes to drugs and our treatment of people who have addiction.
Compared to places like Norway. Compared to countries like Norway and Portugal and people addiction, especially. 100% agreed.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. These people, I remember discussions like this on talk shows back in the 70s, honest to God, talking about why are we treating people with addictions like this? Why are we putting them in jail? Why are we treating them? Isn't it cheaper to do this? Maybe someday. I don't know. We are, like I say, the United States, I mean, we always talk about how great a country we are and stuff, but I tell you, it just drives me crazy, the stupidity of our politicians. And it's all policy driven, kowtowing to their parties, leaders and so forth. I mean, everybody's on the same page as far as nothing changes to get people to actually come out and, use their backbone to support something that makes sense. Suddenly they're a maverick or a rebel. I mean, we're talking common sense. It's completely bizarre in this country these days.
Common sense is not so common, but it's just, it's so money motivated and a lot of it's motivated by greed as well, unfortunately. And, I don't even know what the answers are.
We're in a difficult time right now. I have to agree with our political landscape and so forth. I think if people smoked a little more pot, I think everybody would calm down a bit. I mean, you see what happened in Woodstock, 1969. Everybody's smoking pot. Nobody's doing hard drugs except for a few fools. And were there any fights? Were there any riots or anything like that? No. You ask cops if they go to an event and it's a pot smoking event, they know that nothing's going to happen. You know,
Right.
if you go, I remember Cannabis Cups, you bump into somebody, oh, sorry. Oh, that's all right, man. It's okay. No problem. Don't worry. You bump into somebody at an event where beer is being sold. You bump into somebody, man, you could lose your life. I mean, seriously. How many times have we seen fights in the stands of sporting events? And remember, it's all motivated by drinking. I mean, people get beer muscles. I mean, but people don't get cannabis muscles. They don't want to start fighting you, after they smoke a joint,
For sure. Dead and Company. That was the people causing all the problems were the people drinking alcohol. You weren't seeing the stoners, the people eating psychedelics, pushing and shoving. There was a little pushing and shoving going on at the second to the last night at Dead Company in San Francisco. But let's talk about some High Times photography. One of my favorite covers of all time. Well, I have a bunch of them, but I still have my magazines, believe it or not. But one of them was the chocolate box. They had the different hash in it.
Chocolate box. That was I had a very short reign as cultivation editor, not knowing anything about cultivation. They actually made me editor for a year. But that was my first cover. That was BC Bud, and I was covering BC Bud up in Canada, and it was a Valentine's Day cover. And I remember I showed that cover to some people down in Arizona, and they had a daughter who was somewhat autistic, and she saw the magazine and came over and tried to grab some of the chocolate off the cover, which were buds. So it was pretty realistic looking covers. That was like February 95, I'm going to guess. Yeah, February 95.
That sounds about right. I remember seeing there was some green hash, and I was so excited to try green hash until I tried it for the first time. Yeah, excited for years. I don't think it was probably 2 or 3 years before I found some green hash, paid a bunch of money for it, and it was the worst tasting hash I'd ever tasted. So.
I can't believe everything that was in High Times. Believe me.
Totally. So as far as other photography that you've done for High Times, magazine covers, Centerfolds, the Centerfolds, it was like a Playboy magazine for weed is kind of what High Times was back in the day.
Well, I think that's the way it was conceived, James.
Yeah.
It was to be a kind of like a parody of High Times magazine, Playboy magazine with a centerfold. Yeah, I was really thrilled to be able to shoot as many centerfolds as I did. I think I shot 35 covers in all. That includes Hemp Times and High Times. So I got to shoot incredible stuff. I got shot buds, shot people, shot models. It was great. Having control of the cover was wonderful. I mean, when you get a cover, you've hit a grand slam in photography. So I was always shooting for the covers, always, because it's a huge rush to see your image on the cover. I remember there are some times that things go great. I mean, I remember we shot Kevin Smith on the cover, and the art director Frank Max put Jason Mewes on his shoulder, so it looked like a devil on his shoulder like that. And so it hit newsstands right as 9/11 happened, and so it died on the newsstands. Nobody was buying magazines then, maybe some news magazines and stuff. So that was very, very disappointing. And then I remember one year we were limping along toward the end of the year, and not really. Our covers were not selling. Were like 2 or 3 bombs in a row. And I shot Jenna Jameson for the cover, the porn queen. And I went to her house in Arizona and shot this cover of her. And we ended the year on a bang. No pun intended. But it was amazing. I mean, the thing sold off the hook, and it not necessarily saved the year. I mean, High Times always did well, but certainly made the owners extremely happy that they ended the year with a huge paycheck. So, we turned in some covers that were selling in the hundreds of thousands back then. There were some bad decisions made in 2003. They decided to take the pot out of the magazine. This honestly happened. They brought in John Buffalo Mailer, who was the son of the author Norman Mailer, and another man named Richard Stratton, who was a Hollywood writer who had spent some time in jail for hash smuggling. And they brought them in, and they decided to make it an outlaw Vanity Fair, if you will. And the readers roundly rejected it. Within a few months, High Times was on its deathbed. That is not an exaggeration. So the owners decided that they had made a mistake. We rushed back to cannabis and saved the magazine. And, the best part of that, because the publishing industry has been, dwindling for years, the best part of all that was that we decided to finally bring a Cannabis Cup to America in 2010, the San Francisco Cup. That was our first one. And we realized we had something. So we entered a absolutely golden era of high times from 2010 to 2015. Our cups were just tremendous. In Denver, I think the fifth cup we had there, we had 40,000 people show up over a 3-day weekend. I mean, we had, just so it was, while the publishing industry was dwindling and, was really struggling and magazines were closing, High Times was still holding firm,
Right.
So, so I was with High Times till 2017. And, I think they've made some very, very questionable decisions in the last few years. They have massive debt. They've had 5 CEOs since I left, 5 different CEOs, which doesn't really bode well for a company. And apparently they have massive debt, which is coming due in September. So, I don't know. I would hate to see High Times go. Wonderful magazine. It's certainly a huge part of my life. But who knows? Cannabis media is a very, very dicey thing these days.
Yeah, and I don't know if I'd be here in the same place that I'm in without High Times Magazine. Winning the Cup in 2012 was a big deal for me and my brand and my friends and, all the people around us that were growing our genetics. And I think we held our genetics a little close. We didn't want them to get out as much. So, I've made mistakes along the way, but High Times was definitely pivotal for us. When we first won in 2012, we had no idea that we were going to win because I'd lost I lost in Seattle, entering some extract. We'd done some stuff and we went to Amsterdam thinking we were just going to have a good time. And then, we had a Cali Connection right across from us with Swerve in his 40 or 50 foot long booth that was like 20 feet in the air. And we're like, oh man, these guys know how to do it. We had a little 10 by 10 and we ended up winning the cup. It was pretty wild.
I love that we always love that when that happened because, the Greenhouse and Barney's always had these huge booths, and Cali Connection too. But, it did happen a few times when DNA first showed up. They had a tiny little booth at the Sugar Shack in Amsterdam, a tiny little booth. And they took, I forget what it was. I think it was for Chocolate. And they just, it was great. It was just absolutely put them on the map. Arian from the Greenhouse wanted their strain immediately. I'm sure you've had dealings with these guys too. When you're a winner, they want your strain in their coffee shop.
For sure.
So it's, winning the cup with a strain is a huge, huge thing. It's a shame we haven't had a cup there in years though. I mean, good Lord, like 7, 8, 9 years since we've had an Amsterdam Cup. And I'll tell you, that was the most fun I think I've ever had in the cannabis industry on a regular, yearly basis, because, it really gave Americans a feeling of what real freedom is. I mean, I remember the first time I was at the Cup was 1995, and I was there in the Greenhouse, and I'm smoking a joint in the window of the coffee shop, having a cup of coffee. I said, why is this so forbidden? This is the most natural thing in the world, just enjoying an evening. I thought it's wonderful. Yeah, now that, of course, Amsterdam has got, he's getting a little bit more, they're getting a little bit more strict.
Oh, yeah. No smoking on the streets. They still have the coffee shops, but even the amount of coffee shops compared to back 10 years ago, there's less than a quarter of the amount of coffee shops.
Yeah, there's been a real crackdown. They're trying to, they don't want Amsterdam any longer to have this image of like anything goes down with the red light district and, buying psychedelics over the counter and, buying seeds and stuff. They want to soften. They want to make their image a little bit more respectable. It seems seems to be what's happening there.
Well, and it's really unfortunate because that's one of the most beautiful things about Amsterdam is you can go there and be yourself and get whatever you want. And, you want to smoke, whatever. You want to take some psychedelics. You want to go visit Soma. Soma's, I just talked to him the other day. He's sick in the hospital and now he's out of the hospital. And I think he's in a good mood. That's for sure.
Yeah. Soma's a real character. I mean, I've known him for years. I've photographed him and interviewed him for High Times. He's a very interesting guy, very, very strange, odd background. He's had some heart problems. I remember he pulled up his shirt in one of the Cannabis Cups to show his, bypass scar down the middle of his chest.
Oh yeah. That's Soma for you.
Yeah. But he's, he was a cohort of Jack Hare. I remember, before they went over to the Cup in 1995, I remember Soma and Jack were just smoking up the entire office. I mean, just all day long. So it was wonderful. I mean, every time we'd go back, and talk to him and stuff like that. And Jack, it was a great couple of days before the Cannabis Cup.
Yeah, good times. So yeah, and then Steve Hager, he started the Cannabis Cup, and then his last year was, I think, 2012, the year I won, and that kind of changed the vibe.
Yeah, Steve did a wonderful job inventing the Cannabis Cup, and I think the people who started working the cup after that probably did a better job of just making it a more marketable experience for everybody. I'm not taking anything away from Steve. Steve didn't have much to do with the Cannabis Cups after 2008 or so. I mean, he wasn't in the organizing of things.
Right.
So High Times and the Cannabis Cups are synonymous, and everybody's taking their cue from High Times and our events throughout the country. We had tremendous success with our cups, and I don't see that same success happening at this point.
I mean, now there's all these other events too. You know what I mean? And Emerald Cup has kind of been around, but now Emerald Cup is this big production, and it was never like that. It was very underground and it wasn't private, but it was, yeah.
There's money to be made, James. I think that's why.
Sure. Yeah. And Spanibus is still amazing. I mean, I like Spanibus. It's a great event. That's kind of turned into, for a lot of us, that's like how Fish is to the Grateful Dead. We end up at Spanibus every year, seeing the same people that we saw at Cups, and we've seen at Cups for a long time.
I think Europe's sensibility toward cannabis is very, very unlike America's. So, just more cultured. We have a little bit too much. How America is. It's capitalism. Cannabis capitalism,
right?
And it's really caused problems. California hasn't brought in the revenue that they thought they would. New York doesn't seem to be doing too well either. I mean, legal cannabis has been not a great success so far, as far as what the states thought they were going to bring in, and the black market is alive and well.
So my favorite issue when I was a kid, not my favorite photograph, but my favorite issue was the $1 Million Grow Room. And I think there was something about ecstasy in it, but that was like my favorite when I read $1 Million Grow Room. And then I was actually featured in the next $1 Million Grow Room 10 years later. Now I'm trying to get somebody to do the $1 billion Grow Room. I think that's the next thing.
I've seen some big grow rooms.
Yeah.
I mean, in Colorado, they started using all these industrial parts for cannabis out near the airport. Those were the biggest grow rooms I have ever seen. It was like an acre of pot. Yeah. I mean, just unbelievable stuff. And I'm sure that there are bigger grow rooms like that right now. I mean, if you think about Holland and all the flowers they grow and all the greenhouses that are just lined up for acres, I mean, this can be done very, very easily in the U.S. and Canada. Right. I think we're going to, I would love to see $1 billion grow room. Those are the kind of things that, that we brought to High Times. After a while it became like, okay, we've seen it before. But when it first started happening, it was great. It really was. When we started seeing the big giant grow rooms, people liked seeing that. But then there was also that underlying feeling like, is this the where we wanted the pot thing to go? I mean, I still would, I'm still very much like Jack Hare. I'd like to see just like growing everywhere and, have vegetable stands, sell it right along with tomatoes. I mean, I hate all the regulations. And that's what made High Times great, was because we always encourage people, grow your own.
Right. Totally. Yeah. And I mean, I like the boutique cannabis, and I like the microbrewery model for cannabis. I think that's got a future. It's not going to be like how alcohol was, where there was just 4 big companies. It's going to be a lot different. At least that's what I hope and I expect for the industry. But I also see these smaller businesses. If you're a kid coming in the industry, when I was 14, I started smoking. But if you want something for those kids to look up to, it's not going to be like they're going to, the average kid is going to be able to afford a multi-million-dollar business. But who's to say that he can't grow really good cannabis and eventually build himself into a nice boutique cannabis brand?
Well, I think, like anything, there's room for everybody in this business. If you do your job well, if you're a good grower, if you handle your business responsibly, and, I deal with, similarly honest people, I think you can do very, very well. It's regardless of the corporate the influx of corporate people, I think you can still, create your own entity, as you did, James. I mean, obviously, you had a head start because you were laying the groundwork, and it's very, very underground fashion. But, now when you're able to come out of the closet, you've already, you've laid the foundation and you're ready to go. So laying the foundation, what you did, it takes years. It takes years. But if you want to get involved in the cannabis industry, that's what it takes. It takes years.
And for the most part, with everything, it takes years. I mean, you want to, some people have a natural gift, but
sure,
that's not everything. You know what I mean? Like, just because you can grow really good, I think it's perfecting it at its scale as you're growing up. And, and even if you're not good, it's like you just do it over and over till you get better. And
just even as far as my photography, it's the same thing. I started out, I was a good photographer when I started out with High Times, but I learned over the years how to get better. And I observed everything, all other photographers, I looked at, thousands of photos, try to figure out what works. And, over the years, it took me a long, long time to really say, I think I'm a pretty good photographer. It took me a long time to actually say that, it really did, but at least 20 years. And I didn't, when I started, like I say, and working with High Times in 1991. So yeah, I think when I say 2011, I could say like, my photography is fairly consistent at this point. So yeah, just like anything. And that's why I'm so pleased to, issue this book. This book is coming out, Pot Shots, The Journey of a High Times Photographer. That's the title. And it's really going to be a historical documentation through photographs of the movement, some of the incidents that people don't really know about. And, lots of still life photography, lots of gardens, lots of buds, models, celebrities, the leaders who have gotten us here, the icons of cannabis, Jack Herod, Dennis Perone, Lester Grinspoon, Tommy Chong, all these people I photographed and, got to know. So it's really, people have been asking for the book, and, it's been a slog getting there, but I think it's going to be a real representation of at least my career, and which kind of coincides with the legalization movement.
Totally. That's great. I mean, these things take time, and you have years and years and years of photography.
Oh yeah. I was taking snapshot pictures for a long time, and my wife bought me a Canon AE1 camera for my birthday. This was for Christmas. It was 1984. So I started my photography career relatively late in life at 29 years old. I just got totally into it. And so I shot in an amateur way for years and years and years before I did something for High Times. That was, I did some photography for money prior to working for High Times. Yeah, but in 1989, I did my first feature, shot some rocket munaka, which is an edible from India that Peter Gorman had brought back from his travels. And so I photographed that. That was my first photograph at High Times, 1989. So I've been published now, James, in 5 different decades, 5 different, the 80s, 90s, the zeros, the 10s, and 20s. I shot the Dennis Perone cover. I wrote an article January of this year about the New York State of Kind, the first legal harvest. So that's 5 decades. So if I were Gordie Howe, if this were hockey, I'd be Gordie Howe. That's what I always say.
Wow. Really cool. So let's talk about your working with the people in South Dakota on the res.
Yeah. In 2000, Alex Whiteplume and some other people decided to grow hemp. They had pushed an ordinance through the tribal government, which had okayed the industrial hemp cultivation. So in 2000, 2 crops were sown on the Pine Ridge Reservation. They were both plowed under and raided by the DEA, by the FBI, and by local tribal police. And they came in with guns drawn to seize the crops and drag them away. This was 2000. And they did it again in 2001. They tried to grow again. And in 2002, they did it again. And finally, a court injunction was slapped on them, a federal injunction telling them that they couldn't grow anymore. That was lifted in 2015. But the funny thing about this, in 2000, when they first raided the crop in 2000, the DEA dragged away the crops, dragged them away, and seeds were scattered everywhere. So there's feral hemp growing all over the reservation now, courtesy of the DEA. I mean, just an amazing thing because, this operation had to cost $500,000. And it was a completely, for what? To seize a couple acres of hemp.
Right.
Seriously, that's how crazy things were.
That is
So
crazy.
I was there and got to know the Alex Whitebloom very, very well. Been friends with him for 20 years now. So I mean, there's something I've been involved with a long time is with the Pine Ridge Reservation and their attempts to grow hemp. Now they're growing cannabis legally, and James Loud seeds are in the ground there, from what I understand. Vic Camp, who is a very, very prominent guy on the reservation, is growing James Loud seeds right now. You were kind enough to donate them. And so it's something else. There's legal growing now. They have a couple dispensaries on the reservation. And, it's becoming mainstream there like everywhere else. They have tremendous drug problems on the reservation. Meth is a real scourge. So, not that cannabis can change that in any way, but certainly it's an alternative to doing meth, which is the most destructive drug out there right now.
I believe, well, that and fentanyl. Fentanyl's killing people. Meth is just fucking people up.
Yep.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. So I've been working with. I go to the Lakota war pony races every year. I play Custer. I played Custer in a number of them, where I kind of ride through all the Indians. They come and try to grab the flag from me. It's kind of a symbolic thing in the middle of the race, and whoever grabs the flag, gets like about $500 or something like that. It's a little bit dangerous, but I've been doing that for years. I've gotten to know the Lakota people extremely well over the years. We have a lot of friends there, so it's one of the things I'm most happy about. But also in my book, there are a few other things. I mean, for example, in 1996, Woody Harrelson in Kentucky planted 4 hemp seeds in order to draw attention to these ridiculous laws that were outlawing hemp cultivation in Kentucky, which was the biggest hemp producer in the world. I mean, in the country back in the 1800s, the early 1900s.
Yeah.
So he orchestrated his own arrest. I covered that. I was there at the planting, and I covered his 4 years through the legal system, and he was finally acquitted. And ironically, and not coincidentally, the Lakota's plants were raided on the same day that Woody was acquitted. Now, I don't think that was coincidence. I think it was purposeful. It was the federal government showing we don't care. We're going to continue to outlaw hemp, and we're going to continue to this mad war on cannabis in any way we can. So I've had a lot of experiences that were afforded through High Times magazine. Yeah,
really cool. Yeah, so I mean the Lakota, so that went all the way to the federal.
I went to federal court. They went to the federal court in Missouri. Then the judge said, although he understood and probably agreed with the fact that they should be allowed to grow hemp, it was still up to Congress to change the laws, and he couldn't do anything about that. So it's kind of where it stopped right there.
It's kind of where it stopped and where it started. I mean, I think without that, who knows if hemp would have been legalized and we would have passed the Farm Bill in 2018.
Yeah, well, there were experimental crops going. I mean, they were allowing hemp crops to grow. There were experimental hemp crops growing in Hawaii as far back as 1996, 1997. The Hawaiian legislature allowed a hemp quarter acre to be grown, an experimental crop, as if it needed to be experimented with. Creating experimental hemp crop. I mean, right. What did they expect? There were a lot of experimental crops up until the point where the Farm Bill was passed. But here's the funny thing. Back in the early 90s, we always thought it would be a domino effect. Like hemp would start things off, then medical marijuana, then recreational marijuana. And what happened? It came medical first, then recreational, and then hemp came last. I mean, seriously, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, not that pot's legal on the federal level, but certainly, when you have California and other huge states, allowing recreational pot, the gloves are off. We still have a long way to go.
We still have a long way. I mean, we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. And I think a lot of this stuff is just so counterintuitive. It doesn't make sense necessarily. Like,
Oh, I know. It's the hardest thing, I think, for activists back in the 90s and the 2000s was talking to politicians and trying to explain to them the idiocy of the laws and the sanity of, using cannabis in a way that could really help people. And to just get no's or to get outright hostility or to get people who say, well, this is not an issue that I want to get involved with because I won't get reelected. It must have been extremely frustrating.
Yeah.
If I wasn't involved on the political level by any means. I certainly testified before a few legislatures. I testified in Vermont and in North Dakota, and I testified at the Oglala Tribal Council about hemp. Didn't change anything. People, they kind of listen, then they go home,
Yeah, that's what's so refreshing about going to some other countries. St. Vincent, for example, I was down there and we lectured to the Cannabis Authority down there, but they were sincere in the fact that they wanted to help people with cannabis. The government, the actual government was very focused on allowing people to use cannabis for medical purposes, especially. And I didn't feel like we were a thorn in their side. Like in the United States, I still feel like to a degree we're like a thorn in the side of the government. They're going to let us do it, but it just pisses them off a little bit still.
Oh yeah. I don't think things have changed like that. I mean, Biden is he's an old guy, and he's no marijuana supporter. He's allowed it because I think he realized that, that most Democrats, most liberals are, think that, it should be legal. People should be allowed to use it. But he's no fan of cannabis. He's made that very, very clear over the years, Right. So he's certainly when he was running for office, he never spoke out in favor of cannabis. No. It still hasn't, but he's a hell of a lot better than the alternative. But it's. I don't follow the industry as much as I used to. I'm, marketing my photographs for the most part, and trying to, market my photography and stuff. But I certainly know a lot of people, and they tell me about the problems in the industry, and it's overregulation for the most part that has caused the industry to kind of like be stifled.
Right. Yeah, things are slowly changing, not fast enough.
I don't know what we can do, but this, this High Times, like I said, James was my ticket. There are so many things that I was able to accomplish. All the different celebrities. Good Lord, I mean, when I was with Hemp Times, I met Merle Haggard. I went to his house.
Really cool.
You hang out with these people. I got to meet. I interviewed Oliver Stone. The Lewis Black. Jesse Ventura, I remember when I interviewed Jesse Ventura, he was still just doing his radio show in Minneapolis in 1998. And I just called up his radio station, and said, hey, this is High Times. We'd like to interview so he'll get back to you in just a few minutes. And he did. He called me back.
Wow.
So this was before he was a national figure. So he was, we just knew him as a wrestler.
So what do you think the future of High Times is? Where do you think that magazine's going? I mean, from your inside perspective, I know it's hard to say, but
it's hard to say because I've read a recent article as recent as last week that says that they have massive debt and the debt is coming due, that they have not, and that their lender is also having problems and it could go into receivership, which means that High Times could be owned by somebody else. So I thought
the dispensary model, like we have a dispensary off Highway 880 in Oakland. I thought that was a great I thought it was a great thing because everybody knows High Times magazine that smokes from back in the day, at least. Now we have a lot of new people, and I don't think they've done really well like they thought they would, or like I hoped they would.
Well, apparently they owe an awful lot of rent in some of these places. They've made some bad deals. I think that the dispensary business is not the gold mine that everybody thinks it is. It takes a lot of work. It is a 24/7 job, stocking the place, staffing the place. And believe me, inventory goes fast. So, I'm sure that, High Times has had their problems as far as the dispensary business in California as well. I mean, it's an overregulated industry. So all I could read, James, I don't have an opinion about where it's going because I don't understand high finance at the least. they seem to keep going, even though they're carrying massive debt. That's all I can tell you from what I read. People can look this up easily enough. You just, Google High Times debt. You can see where the magazine is going. So even though I have, fondness for the magazine, and, I got very, very thankful for my experiences. I watched the last 5-6 years and, kind of wonder where it's going. Is it going to survive?
Right.
As simple as that. Like all magazines, so many magazines have died over the years. I mean, so many, believe me. It's, the only magazine that seem to do any are celebrity magazines.
Right.
Then,
tabloids.
Yeah. They're very, very niche magazines, but like I say, you don't see magazines anymore. People don't go to the newsstands anymore. I got to pick up the latest issue of Esquire or something like that. People don't do that anymore. So
I even think to a degree books will be going away. I mean, I think like books like yours, that's a different kind of book. So that's a book that you're going to, coffee table book. Those are great. But I mean, even books regarding technology or breeding or growing, I think the access to information on the internet is just so vast. But the problem is dialing the information in, because now it's almost sensory overload. You go on the internet and there's 20 different ways to do the same thing. Well, which one do you pick? And, there's ratings on stuff. So I'm going to pick the top rated one, but maybe that's not necessarily the best. Maybe it's not the easiest. So it's difficult. And the future is going to be interesting.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons I think High Times is also struggling, because we used to be the go-to source for marijuana cultivation tips and techniques and so forth, and all the new innovations. Now, as you said, all of that stuff is on the internet. You can dial this up. There are so many experts. There's so many videos that, you don't need to buy High Times any longer. So that is also, it's made it difficult. I mean, the grow articles are not all that interesting anymore. I mean, you can write 1,000 words, in High Times, or you can, read it online, and you can read other sources. You can, that becomes a difficult for a magazine to survive when all the information they used to publish is online. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a whole different world. I mean, Phototrons, if you wanted a Phototron in 1995, you had to get it from you go in High Times magazine, you read about it. They didn't have a website. You could call them, you could give them a credit card number maybe, or you could send a check in. That was like a big thing back then. You'd send the check in.
Do people know what the Phototron was?
No, you know what, we've talked about it on my show before, but that was my first attempt at growing, was in a Phototron, and then I cut the top off and put a 400-watt light that was taken from the Sun Valley Mall.
I always loved reading about the people who did innovative things to grow very, very small. The people who would take an ordinary closet, make a vegetation room on the and a flowering room on top, and have the perpetual harvest in this tiny little area. I always thought that was fantastic. I really did. All the different ways people grow. I remember going into Las Vegas, and the guy took me into his garage. He said, "You see the grow room?" I said, "No, it's empty." And he had a wall that actually came out like a horror movie, like it's a secret room.
Right.
He had all these shelves where actually came out, and you could walk behind it. And he said cops had actually come over and could not and looked at it for something, looked at the house for something else. Could not see it. You would never know it was there. So I always, I saw a guy in Santa Cruz once who, under the foundation of his house, and he was renting the house, he did a sea of green grow room. He only had 3 feet of space down there, but it was amazing. He had cut his floorboards in his closet in order to climb down underneath the house in order to make a sea of green grow room. So, that was that kind of innovation back then. It just blew me away. It really did.
Yeah. So one last question before we go. What was the best thing you ever smoked?
Oh, geez.
In all these years, you got to have one standout that.
I haven't had it in a while, but I really like sour diesel.
Nice.
I really did like sour diesel. And as I said, the most intense experience I ever had was on Oaxaca. And that was back in 1976. And that just blew me away. I felt like I was spiraling up, couldn't come down,
How New York of you for sour diesel. Yeah, that is the most popular So as far as, I think there's some other stuff coming for the longest time. That was the one.
And then Diesel. Kyle Cushman always had a steady supply of sour diesel in the office.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the first time I came to High Times office. I think I scared you guys.
We welcomed you.
Yeah.
We welcomed you. Anybody with the kind of strains you have, you're our best friend.
The backpack. And I'm from California, so I didn't realize you didn't want to smell like weed in New York on that level.
No, well, it was the office we were more concerned about than anything else, because always getting complaints from up and down, in our high rise. I remember the people below us called us that 70s floor.
That's great. Well, if people are interested in finding out more about your book, or they're interested in following you online, how would they go about it?
Well, my book, once it's out, I will be publicizing it heavily. But you can, I'm on Facebook, Malcolm MacKinnon, and I'm also at M MacKinnon Photos on Instagram, at M MacKinnon Photos. That's on the Instagram. So you can follow me there. I have a website, malcolmmackinnon.com, and nativeamericanphotography.com, which will take you to the same place. So people can see my work, and I hope they do. As I said, James, I'm really, really happy you had me on I'm on the show, and you're part of the book. You're in my acknowledgments, and there's a photo of you undercover there with your San Francisco 49ers hat pulled down. You know that shot.
Oh yeah. You took some good ones. You say I still have the one of me shooting pool into the glass jars. That's like one of my favorites of all time.
They sent Allison a few shots, so you should have them.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. And I look forward to talking to you soon. Hopefully we can get the guys on the res to tune into one of these episodes.
Well, I'll try to get them on the line, because Vic's a great guy. I'll do that for you.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, James, take care.
Cheers.